Okay, let's start off the webinar. Welcome everyone. My name is David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance. And the Conservation Finance Alliance, the CFA, has launched an incubator. It was the years back in, I think we started in 2019 with the initial call for proposals. And we then selected 15 companies, 5 which received a small grant and 10 of which received mentorship. And we've been working with these companies now for just about 9 months or so. We're really excited to start a webinar series that is going to present some of these companies that have been, working to save and improve nature through different means, including as using market-based mechanisms and others. And we think you'll really enjoy this webinar series. Please stay tuned. I think we have another one coming up. RIMBA, an organization in Malaysia that works on forest carbon and other ecosystem services, are going to be presenting shortly. I believe it's next week. And anyway, we're thrilled to start with carbon yield and a group that's trying to support, well, I'll let them tell you all about what they're doing and pass it over to Sam Schiller. Just before Sam starts, just so you know, the way questions work is that Sam and Claire will be presenting over the course of about 25 minutes or so. We'll have hopefully plenty of time for questions and answers. What you will do is write your questions into the chat box down at the bottom, and then we'll try to pick you in order. We'll ask you to unmute your microphone. You could ask your question directly. If you prefer to not ask it directly, just make a note in the chat box with your question that you'd like us to just read the question. And we'll have a lively discussion. And without further ado, over to you, Sam.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And it's been such a pleasure for us to be able to participate in the CFA Incubator and just get a lot of face time with David, who has provided, in particular, just incredible insight into the project and mentorship. And we're deeply grateful and excited to be part of the CFA community. I started Carbon Yield with Claire about 2 years ago. I'll give a little bit more about Claire's background as we get closer to her presentation. But I've spent about 10 years operating in carbon markets. I started 2 other firms, Tradewater and Wabashco, that worked in California's compliance market, developing offsets in a variety of industries, but have gotten really excited about the opportunity to create economic development, rural development, and soil health alongside of carbon projects by regenerative agriculture. And we've been focusing most of our work in the U.S. at this point in kind of the Corn Belt, from upstate New York to the Great Plains area. And we're excited to share a little bit about our model and approach, and would love to entertain your questions and continue to learn from this community. So Claire, do you mind advancing? So I often think about how if I were pitching to venture capitalist about some biomimicry solution that used solar power to sequester up to half of the world's annual emissions, and could create all of the world's food that it needed, and provide habitat and biodiversity, you could get billions of dollars of venture capital. But the moment that you say, it actually already exists, it's called soil, somehow all the wallets close up. But soil really is one of our most precious natural resources. Obviously it has degraded over time and is one of the leading contributors to climate change. That about a third of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere right now is once was residing in productive soils that have been degraded by the way we've transformed land. We need to find ways to create better incentives so that soil is restored and can act as an important climate solution and improve food security and a variety of other important elements. Carbon markets really should help create those incentives and align soil health and financial health, should align the kind of societal benefits that healthy soil, that carbon storage conveys. But for a variety of reasons, carbon markets aren't really working for farmers right now. The estimates that you get from carbon markets for the soil storage from regenerative agriculture are really low relative to some of the research, the new research we've seen. It's really irritating to register a carbon project. And the prices, absent compliance market, absent significant demand, prices have been pretty low. And so it just really hasn't been worth the time of farmers to enter carbon markets and to create this kind of alignment. And because there has not been this alternative ecosystems based economy, this one that values the kind of services that regenerative agriculture can create, we're stuck with a commodity agricultural system that's really degrading our lands in profound ways. You can see here in kind of our target markets in upstate New York and in through the Midwest and Great Plains, some of the most massive carbon loss since the Industrial Revolution, and that's from the way we've transformed land. But at the same time, these lands do have the capacity to regenerate and to bring carbon back into them. The commodity system is not just failing the environment; it's also failing farmers. Over the last 5 years, 6 years, farmers have on average been losing money, farmers are both getting hit in both directions. The prices for commodity crops are going down, and the unit cost of inputs is going up, and you need to use more of them when the soil is degrading. And so it has become harder and harder to make commodity farming work, and farmers are pushed to aggregate land, to take on a lot of debt. It really is straining their economics, and farmers are looking for alternatives. And organic agriculture is really one of the bright spots in terms of creating a premium for an environmental product that farms, after a 3-year very difficult transition, can be pretty profitable, can go from losing, as we said in the last slide, $12 to $50 an acre, to making maybe $200 to $300 per acre annually. And that's been due to really durable organic premiums, growth in that market. So that's a bright spot, but it's just hard to get there. Regenerative practices, which are not the same as organic practices, there's a lot of overlap in terms of reducing chemical usage, but regenerative practices are about rebuilding soil life intentionally by limiting tillage, by having longer crop rotations, cover cropping, perennials. It's a variety of practices that really used to be more of a dominant part of how we farmed. But in a sort of yield-driven, chemical-driven agriculture, we've lost some of these practices. And by combining regenerative and organic practices, farmers can be both profitable and restore soil health, and bring a variety of important benefits in terms of carbon drawdown, resilience, drought resistance, and also decrease some of the inputs, fertilizer use that farms are facing right now in a commodity system. So if it were a no-brainer, if you could make $200, $300 per acre, a lot of people would jump to it. But it's a pretty harrowing transition for a medium-sized farm. It could cost $1 million upfront to make that transition. There are a lot of financial and farming barriers to actually making that transition. And we're looking to help farmers overcome those issues, and hopefully overcome it without having to take on much more debt, and be able to really generate new revenues from carbon markets that will help support this transition and allow them to reach more stability. So carbon yield enables farmers to get real value from carbon markets to support a transition to these kinds of regenerative and organic practices. And we do this in part by trying to increase the prices that farmers get from carbon markets through differentiated credit marketing. we leverage some of our carbon project development skills to make it easier for farms to access these markets. And we're also really working on the scientific side to make sure that farms are getting properly compensated, getting accurately compensated, and more substantially, hopefully, for the kinds of benefits that they're creating with these outstanding practices. So that's our value proposition to farmers. And Claire is going to talk, at least initially, about this kind of differentiated credit marketing experience. And this has been really the focus of the incubator project that we've been working on. And really, Claire has been leading the business plan development process of building a platform that really works better for farmers, that is farmer focused, and generates the kind of value that they need to make these transitions, but also is a compelling business model for Carbon Yield and our partners. So Claire has been a fantastic partner in this effort, comes from a social services background and impact measurement background, and has been an outstanding leader in this space. So I'll pass it to Claire.
Thanks, Sam. So we are building a marketplace. We call it the Farmers Market of Carbon Offsets with our partners Hudson Carbon. They are a research entity stationed on a farm in the Hudson Valley of New York. And so with Carbon Yield and Hudson Carbon and our partner Earthrise Media, we have covered both the farm basis, the carbon project development, and Earthrise is providing the technical solutions to really figure out how we can bring people who are interested in purchasing these benefits to the land that the farmers are developing them on. Our vision is for a premium marketplace that is grounded in a genuine connection to the people and the place, a farmer's market for carbon offsets, where you both know and trust the farmer producing the offset, like you know and trust the farmer you buy your fruits and vegetables from, and are invested in their success. We create meaningful transactions between climate conscious folks and farmers the farmers who are practicing these exemplary agriculture, these partnerships between organic and regenerative that can really make that significant impact. And our marketplace is connecting farmers with a community of mission-driven brands and these climate conscious consumers that can really make a difference. And they can then connect with an authentic experience of offsetting with a real grower on a real piece of land. So how does this work? It's a two-sided marketplace that allows farmers to efficiently host and store carbon offsets and leverages our unique expertise to tell the convincing story of their farming operations and to market them as a place-based, transparent, premium offset to these brand partners and individuals. And it's a pretty neat piece of technology. Here you can see our app where you can which will allow these brands to literally choose by their plot of land in a foot by foot square acre, the amount of carbon that really fits their needs, and while seeing the farmer's story. It's a unique and piece of GIS mapping that lets you do this on your phone or on your computer, or even hopefully directly integrated into your shopping cart. So here you can see when a consumer arrives at the Hudson Carbon Marketplace, they'll be able to search for exactly what the farm and the field they want to purchase an offset from, whether it's a farm up the street or a farm across the country near where their family lives. And they'll have the narrative content and an interactive map to do so. And this can also be sourced directly from brands that are supporting this sort of behavior. So here you see in a shopping cart, like from one of the many brands we have interviewed, that a consumer can flow directly from making their purchase to making a pair of shoes carbon neutral that they're buying while they proceed through the process. So we've had a lot of successful interest with brands. It's part of the new way that brands are interacting with consumers. Consumers are driving this interest and strong mission alignment when they're doing their shopping. They've changed their behavior to reflect their values in their purchasing, and brands are responding positively to this. So our technology, which will be embeddable in their shopping cart, will create carbon offsets as an integral part of your shopping experience. It'll be seamless, and consumers and brands can both benefit from this relationship. You can see here just adding a little Hudson Carbon. It's easy as if you're adding shipping or a gift receipt, but then you have a carbon neutral purchase that you can ship to your front door like we're all doing right now without any guilt. So Hudson Carbon Marketplace with Carbon Yield has had success in integrating this with a brand. Light Phone, a company that sells basically a dumb smartphone, has been selling this to their consumers, and about more than 40% of people have elected to also offset their carbon, which on a $150 phone probably is about a $3 purchase. It's a very reasonable addition to what is a big purchase. And we've been really excited about this partnership with them. So that's how we're differentiating our marketing. But the other piece of the puzzle is, how do we work with farms? Because this is not a painless process. It hasn't been, which is why it hasn't been working. But Carbon Yield is working to make carbon project development very convenient and smooth for the farms. So we are going to make sure that farms are getting paid directly for the practices that they're sequestering. And we make it as painless a process as possible by managing all of the data and registering the project with NORI, the carbon registry we're currently working with, which then goes through a third-party verification. So all of the credits are based in science, have been verified by an outside party. And then from there, we can turn that into revenue with farms. We've had a lot of really good conversations and building relationships with new farms. Over 100,000 acres have already expressed interest or joined on and are part of our next batch of registrations. So you can see some of them here. They span both the Northeast and, as Sam said, the whole Corn Belt. And this isn't just a small farm or a medium farm project. Landowners, there's a lot of external interest moving behind regenerative agriculture right now. And so this is a telling moment to get involved in this market. And we think that that can really make a difference for these farms that we're getting involved with. Marketplace is pretty simple. 80% of the revenue from the sales of the credits goes directly to the farms, who have no costs in signing up and going through the credit verification process with us. And then 20% will support the costs that for us that will accumulate. And we think that this will provide a convincing and motivating revenue for farms at that level. Here we have a case study on a farm that we're currently is undergoing transition from conventional practices to regenerative organic. They're doing it incrementally over 5 years, switching a bunch of acres at a time. And we're going to work with them to register carbon on those acres that they've now transitioned. We can expect over 5 years that they could earn at a 1 ton per acre, $65 per ton price, $225,000 on the marketplace, which is a significant chunk of money as they slowly transition through the process, and will definitely ease those barriers that they've experienced. This is our timeline. So we expect in 5 years to be hopefully working with over 150,000 acres. This year we're launching, in the near term, we'll be launching the actual marketplace either basically at the beginning of February. So we look forward to having you all interact with our platform. And from there, we're just going to continue onboarding more farms and building out the API widget, which will help us integrate with more brands directly. I'd like to pass it back to Sam for the third key piece of our puzzle, which is improving the soil science to help measure these offsets better and better improve the outcomes for farms.
Thanks, Claire. The idea of making sure that science is part of this is because you can't just look at increasing prices forever. And we'd love for a massive premium market of buyers to buy at $100 per ton. But ultimately, we think as this moves closer to a compliance market, as there are more buyers, there are just going to be different kinds of buyers that come forward that might not have that premium price point. And so fundamentally, we need to make sure that we're measuring the changes in the soil much better. And in regenerative agriculture, there are a lot of benefits that are created that are below the reach of measurement. And so the dominant greenhouse gas models, like Comet Farm that many of you may have heard of, only take in input data to model greenhouse gas changes in the first 10 centimeters of soil, just a very shallow measurement. But root systems from alfalfa, root systems from cover crops can penetrate up to 1 meter deep into the soil. And if you're not using those cover crops or alfalfa or any other perennials, Comet does a pretty good job measuring your operation. But for some of these multifaceted regenerative farms that we've been working with, it's really not working. And so Hudson Carbon, one of our core partners who's partnered on the marketplace, also is a leader in soil science. You can go to the next slide, Claire. And they have a really incredible research operation that has gone alongside their transition to regenerative organic practices. Their 2,000-acre working farm that also has a soil lab that takes meter-deep soil cores, uses all kinds of instrumentation, biomass readers, eddy flux covariance towers, things that can actually bring a lot of scientific rigor to the study of these benefits. To farmers, to soil. And so we are working to make sure that science, you can, these are our, oh yeah, here, this is what an eddy covariance flux tower looks like. Sorry, we advanced all the way forward to our appendix. But the idea is to make sure that the scientific community is benefiting from some of these insights. And so farms that cannot take soil cores, that cannot measure 1 meter deep into the ground and take data from 10 research sites, can, when they use Comet model, benefit from some of these advances in soil science. And so we have been working with Soil Metrics and USDA and researchers at the University of New Hampshire to make sure that these insights are incorporated into modeling and can eventually create a better scientific backbone for carbon markets. So we're kind of using what we have right now in terms of these limited models, the ability to take expensive but helpful direct measurements, which will improve accounting for carbon storage, while also trying to do this kind of innovative marketing that gets a high unit price for carbon and supports kind of our first round of growers. But in the long term, we also hope that there will be the scientific movement, which I think has been harder for a lot of startups in the space to focus on because it takes time. But we believe in being patient and really investing long term so that we see these benefits in the market and can really scale these solutions across working lands. So we have plenty of time for questions, and we'd love to hear from you all.
All right. Well, thank you, Sam and Claire. What a fascinating area. I mean, clearly, with the population growth in the world today, and with the history of soil loss and soil degradation across so many parts of the planet, coming up with solutions that will help the farmers generate more money from the ecosystem services that they produce, either water retention, and in this case, carbon sequestration. Carbon is such an important part of the balance. So I applaud you on your efforts, and think that this really there's a lot of opportunity here. So so for everyone listening in, please put in some questions here. We've got a couple coming in, and I think I just want to, before I pass it on to some other people, I want to just maybe ask a couple questions myself. organic agriculture has clear standards that can be used to have third-party verification, things like that. Is there any movement for regenerative agriculture in that direction, and sort of because you had mentioned the premiums? I'm always looking for, how can we get revenue from sustainability? And so you mentioned the premiums for organic. Are there any such thing for regenerative before we go into the carbon part?
Sure, and I think organic is a really imperfect premium, and people buy it for a lot of different reasons. Maybe it's for health reasons, maybe it's for environmental reasons, maybe it's safety reasons. Regenerative is a very specific benefit in terms of climate impact. And so there's been, I think, resistance or just skepticism that people will really actually pay for that benefit. I do know that Rodale Institute has been working on an initiative to create an organic plus regenerative standard that makes it even more premium to buy these great grains. So that's one initiative. I know there's also been some initiatives with General Mills where they've been labeling like mac and cheese boxes with that give a little bit of narrative about the regenerative practices from a grass-fed dairy operation or regenerative wheat, things like that. So there's been some movement there, and I know a lot of it has been kind of product specific. That I think people are putting up trial balloons. So there's a beef bar that's out there that is saying, this is 100% sourced with regenerative beef. And I think they're trying to see, is there actually a market for a premium that we can get just based on this one kind of labeling. And we'll see, we'll see if that gets codified into a standard. But I think the industry, CPGs in particular, would love to see this as a cost reduction initiative where, farms are getting some extra benefit by reducing their input costs and other things, and they don't have to pay them more for it. The farmers get their benefit from cost reduction. And we think that's because of the kind of risk farmers have to take through the transition, because of some of the yield declines on the way to regenerative. I think it can be a lot to ask. And so we think having a specific payment for carbon, at least now, that is separate and apart from the commodity, from the actual underlying food product, is helpful. But if there were a label that did get a premium, that's certainly another helpful way to support growers.
Right, and so in a way, carbon puts you in the right direction, at least with being compensated for some of these additional values you're creating by doing this. We have a bunch of questions coming in, but very exciting. The first one or two come from Barbara Henze. Barbara, if you're happy to unmute yourself and ask your questions, that would be fantastic. And then Jim Javankowski.
Hi, Claire and Sam. Wonderful presentation. And I lived in the Hudson Valley for many years, and I miss it desperately.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm very good friends with Ned Sullivan and Scenic Hudson on top of it. So you're in great company. I wanted to find, so I have two questions. One, I wondered if besides the Hudson Carbon, if you're collaborating with anyone to do research with any other organizations or universities, because obviously it's a huge project. And secondly, I wonder, I'd love to hear an example of how you approach companies or approach a company about joining to be a part of this effort and how you go about doing that.
Absolutely. We are definitely partnering with other universities, and we have a core partnership with University of Michigan, where a researcher has been studying organic transitions and different cover crops, and has some master students that are doing a thesis project that is essentially working with those same growers that are going through this research and helping them understand opportunities in carbon markets. And so it is a multidisciplinary effort to be able to connect the soil science to kind of practical incentives for farmers. So that has been a great partnership. We're also working closely with the researchers at University of Colorado Colorado State University, sorry, who help manage the Comet farm tool. We've been sharing data with them to help advance carbon modeling. We also have Hudson Carbon has a grant to work with a researcher at the University of New Hampshire who has a different greenhouse gas bioregional model that they've been calibrating with data from regenerative farms. So we definitely see this as needing partnerships with universities. We've been in conversations with Cornell and with a few others. We also work very closely with Woods Hole Marine Biological Lab, which is affiliated with the University of Chicago, but it's an independent research institution. In terms of how we've partnered specifically with a company, Lightphone is really an interesting example. We could talk about a few others too, but what's interesting is they started with a life cycle assessment. They wanted to just understand what is the impact of our fundamental product, and what would it mean to make that a climate positive product. And so they, one of the software developers that they work with also works with Earthrise, and they wanted to know, what would it take to actually provide a real transparent, product that would help us offset this phone. And they felt like some of the ways to communicate that to their customers was to actually have something that costs something. That if you only had 60 kilograms of impact from your phone, and it only cost you a few cents to offset, it wouldn't feel like you were really doing something real. They're also a company that's based in the same region, and from a values perspective, wants to have more of a connection to place. They are a phone that doesn't want you to be distracted by all the apps. They just want you to be able to connect with people and call and text. They felt like having a connection to place was really important. And so they did a pretty thorough due diligence process, both of the kind of marketing they do and the kind of assets we could provide them on their site, as well as due diligence about the registry we were choosing and the research methods. It was a pretty interesting process, but ultimately they wrote a long Medium post that described why they felt like this was the kind of top of the line, most high integrity offset available, and one that met their values as a company. It was worth spending $100 a ton on, and they ended up splitting that cost between their customers and between the company. So there's sort of a shared ownership of those environmental impacts and potential benefits.
Excellent, thanks. Let's maybe move on to Jim. Jim, if you could ask your question very briefly, that would be great if you're happy to unmute yourself.
Sure. Thanks, David. Sam and Claire, thanks for sharing this very exciting solution that you developed. And very briefly, I'm curious about the participation in what you call the climate conscious consumers. This may be a little bit out of scope of what you're doing now, but I'm wondering if there's an opportunity in the marketplace for people who are urban residents of any city. I live here in Chicago, to participate by actually transitioning some of the landmass that they have access to, specifically the parkways that exist between sidewalks and streets, and transitioning those from sod grass to cover crops or native prairie plants. And even though that's a very nanoscale size of landmass, collectively it would add up to be significant. So I'm just curious if you've ever thought about something like that.
It's interesting. We were just recently approached by a group of students from Cornell who are working on a project to restore hedges along the Erie Canal, that they felt like this is also marginal land that could have high conservation value, could protect an important natural resource and waterway. And they said, this isn't a working land. This isn't a conventional carbon project, but there's a significant amount of land that's involved if you aggregate it, and you can get a lot of small landowners involved. And we're thinking about it. A lot of what drives what's possible is whether there is a protocol, a carbon methodology that's available that says, this is what the baseline case is of that land, and this is the benefit of a project intervention. I know that there's an urban forestry protocol within actually California's compliance market that allows you to aggregate, small parcels of forested land, including in cities, to be able to generate offsets from the forestation effort. We've also thought wetland remediation, which could also possibly happen on a smaller scale. It's something we're interested in. I mean, I think we've prioritized more dominant land uses and where the biggest carbon loss is coming from, and where the biggest potential gains can come from. And the interesting thing about regenerative approaches is it's not compromising your ability to do the fundamental thing you want to do on the land. You can reach basically yield parity, in some cases exceed yields by taking these approaches, while also valuing environmental values and environmental assets like carbon and water and all the other important assets that David also mentioned. So that's been our kind of first focus. But I think it would be great if there were other models that could help value smaller parcels, help smaller landowners as well. But this felt like the tip of the spear for us. But Jim,
I think
oh, go ahead, Claire. Sorry.
I think you've landed on something that we believe is essential, though, is like bringing community along with doing that. So if we're, as Sam said, like regenerative agriculture on commodity producing farms is where we've started, but for climate scale solutions, I'm also in Chicago, so I have that 4 foot by 6 foot square of grass in front of my house, and that's also like, if we can figure out a solution like that, and the science is working on it, there's a path forward. This is definitely a way to do it. So
I was going to say I'm in Chicago too, so we're all Chicagoans here. Good to see you. Good to have you here, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, Jim and Sam and Claire. Now we have a question from Marit Hort. I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right, but it's coming from DR Congo. So this is, one of the last great standing, tropical forests here. Question on red. Marit, are you able to unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David. And also thanks to Sam and Claire for an excellent presentation. Really interesting. I am not in Chicago, as you heard. I'm in Chicago, so far away. And I realize my question then obviously goes outside of your current scope. But because I work for the National Red Plus Fund here. So the fund that's aiming to invest in projects that can help reduce emissions from deforestation. And that involves a lot of projects on agriculture. And what we do share with you guys is that we're looking for ways to incentivize farmers to adopt sustainable practices. And your idea of incentivizing or paying the farmer directly is really something that got me curious, and something we ideally would like to find ways of doing. And I understand that you seem to primarily been working in the US context so far, but I wonder if you've at least given it a thought or looked into how could a model like yours apply in a developing country where, first of all, rolling out technology like you do is very difficult. Access to funding is a big challenge. Plus, people cannot necessarily afford to or have the knowledge to be climate conscious consumers, So there are a lot of the elements of your model that simply kind of don't exist here. But yeah, I'd be curious to know whether you have looked into it, if you have done any collaboration or research that could be of relevance. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for action. It's something we're deeply interested in. I think that I'm really excited about the idea of pairing sort of regenerative agriculture projects with RED and forestry projects, because I know that there are really complicated leakage dynamics where you may preserve some forests and it creates the incentive to take them down elsewhere. And I think the fundamental dynamic that's pushing people to new lands to expand their farming operations is degraded soil, and is a sort of a model that's been really thrust on small farmers of using these chemical inputs and not being able to thrive long term using these kinds of practices that allow the same land to be productive over a long period of time. And so I think it would be really interesting to think about pairing these kinds of approaches together. We haven't unlocked the solution for that, but it's something we're really interested in. We've talked. We've talked to Rimba, which is doing great forestry work. Remind me, David, is that in Malaysia? Yeah. And I think that ultimately we want to see a higher carbon price in general, and think that carbon has been underpriced systematically because it's just been this kind of voluntary approach, and it's been developers that are happy to get any price for carbon. And we think putting out a really high carbon price really helps everyone, and setting expectations from corporations and from NGOs that are buying these credits, that there's actually a high social cost of carbon. You should meet that you should have that reflected in the carbon pricing, and that can make a whole lot of other types of projects viable. So we're interested in increasing carbon prices so that it works for the project, so that it can activate some of these projects that may be a little bit harder in different contexts, or their cost of aggregation. I think the other side of the coin is just making sure that verification is more efficient and not costly. If you have lots of small landowners, that's hard to do. But we've been working on building satellite-enabled tools, remote tools that can detect changes on the land in ways that allow a project to be verified at a much lower cost. There are some elements that, as we move forward, may be helpful in different contexts. But it's something we're definitely open to talking about further, and excited about your work and red development internationally.
Just this morning, I got an email from a women's coffee grower cooperative in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's obviously something happening on the ground there. And I think one of the things we have learned as we go through our first few years is the regionality of agriculture is so important. And that's important when you talk about who you're selling to and how you're quantifying the benefits. And so right now, as we focus, on our backyard, it's been a learning process in that way. And we want to, and we have dreamed about expanding to make this fit a lot of different places. I know Hudson Carbon just started a Silvaterra agave project in Mexico, but you need the right partners on the ground to make that happen. And I think that finding these partnerships is definitely the way that we can figure out a solution that actually fits the needs of all of those regional growers. So it's definitely something we should keep talking about.
Excellent, thank you all. So a few more questions coming up here. So we'll go on, but obviously we have a strong interest in Congo forests, and think that it's great to see the work that you're doing there, Marit, to try to move that marketplace forward. It's really essential. So best of luck there. And David Rafeta had a question about third-party certification. David, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'll try to do it. I want to understand if you evaluate any certification from a third party based maybe on international standard like ISO 14064, for example.
Right. So I'm not totally familiar with what the verifiers are, what standards the verifiers are supposed to follow. I believe there is an ISO standard within the registry we work with is called the Nori Carbon Removal Marketplace, one of many, and they have a set of verifier regs, and I think generally verifiers that are accredited under Vera or under ACR or CAR, many of the main registries, they end up being eligible under if they're eligible under one, they're eligible under all of them. I think there is some alignment in data materiality and some of the thresholds of evaluating these projects. So I do think that there is a pretty robust standard making process. I don't totally know which standard it is that they're obliged under, but I have generally been impressed with the kind of rigor that those verifiers operate under. Does that answer your question, or am I missing a piece of it?
No, it is correct. It's only it's a question because me and my partner, we are having similar approach, similar to yours approach here in Italy. But the problem we are finding here is explain to people the value of this approach in the market. It's much more easy, say if somebody plants trees, it's much more easy to explain to people than change agriculture approach.
Right.
And so we was thinking that certification give an added value in this, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that I mean, it gets back to some of David's questions too about who is interested in paying more for something and why, what drives that decision making. And if you can have a seal of excellence that is carried with your products, that's great. But it also gets to infrastructure questions of like, you might have a seal of excellence for your farm, but if you are depositing your grains in a grain elevator that's commingling all of that commodity with everyone else's grain that isn't certified, then it's really hard to convey those benefits to one specific farmer. So there's infrastructure challenges, and frankly, we work with a lot of infrastructure partners that help us think about segregating grains, and particularly organic grains, to get them to market and to get that kind of value. But there's definitely a lot of dimensions to that, supply chain analysis of how you make these things work.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, the third-party verification is also part of the set of standards that are established, right? Which even for voluntary markets like Vera and things like that, so that to have more and more standards for agriculture, I think, is a really important step forward that gives you more meat to work with. Manuel Quiros has a question about Europe. I think that relates in a way to the previous question. Manuel, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, I'm just going to read it out loud. Thanks for sharing. Do you know anything similar in Europe? And how was the initial attitude / interest from non-organic farmers to join the program? Great question.
Yeah. It's a great question. I know that there are some initiative. I mean, I guess the UK is no longer Europe, but I think that there is some sort of soil carbon governmental incentive that's being developed in Great Britain that I'm interested to see. I mean, if it is the case that governments that are making massive greenhouse gas commitments under the UN framework, and they can meet some of their goals by incentivizing farmers to change their behaviors, there may be a role for governments to make these payments. I mean, we make a lot of payments in terms of subsidies for things that are actually not generating a whole lot of extra benefit. And the idea of aligning subsidies with soil health metrics seems interesting to me. I think that the way that offsets have worked in Europe traditionally under Kyoto is that companies can buy offsets from essentially developing countries, from countries that are outside of the European Union that have signed on to Kyoto, and it becomes part of the clean development mechanism. And I have not seen a lot of domestic offset development in Europe. Certainly there's renewable energy development, and there may be soil health initiatives and things like that. But I don't see it sort of arranged in the same way. But at the same time, there is a big initiative among companies to become carbon neutral, to become climate positive, and there is demand for buying some of these offsets. And whether those projects that they're sourcing from are developed within the European Union or outside, I don't know exactly how that works at this point. But I do think that on the demand side for credits, Europe has always been the leader, and we're excited to see how that materializes, both from a compliance point of view in their emissions trading system, but also from a voluntary point of view, or from a just sort of corporate social responsibility perspective.
Yeah, and there may be new regulations on supply chains in Europe that could be very, very interesting, because the supply chains are of course, where huge amounts of of carbon come in, but you don't really see it because it's outside of the operation. So we had just another question from Trey Carpenter, who had to leave the call earlier, but I think it's interesting. Is there currently a regulatory mechanism in place to incentivize soil-based carbon capture in California, given its cap and trade program? What about states that are likely to replicate California's system in the coming years, including New York?
Yeah, there is none in California. They have a commission that's evaluating new project types, but from what I've read in the sort of commission's reporting on different project types, there's a negative perception about soil carbon projects, that there are permanence questions in terms of if you till up the land and you till up a lot of the benefits. We've seen that that risk may be a little bit tempered if you're looking at deeper sources of soil carbon that are stored below the reach of tillage implements, but that because we're working on the vanguard of science here, it hasn't made its way into these carbon models, and there's still a negative perception. New York, we've actually been working with a legislator out there that had introduced a carbon farming legislative initiative that didn't initially pass, but I think they're reintroducing it now. Some of it is focused on research, which is great, but New York as a state has really greenhouse gas goals, and meeting some of those with agriculture is helpful for a variety of reasons, including political reasons. And we've also talked to basically their public utility commission that also had been investing in renewable energy projects, but is also interested in soil carbon as a way of meeting environmental goals. So there's a lot of interest there. RGGI is the other sort of compliance market that's out there that ostensibly could create an incentive for soil carbon. This is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative on the Eastern Seaboard. The carbon pricing hasn't really been that high, and I think carbon developers probably can get a higher price elsewhere, and so the offsets have not been a substantial part of that program, but that may change as the goals continue to ratchet down and the price of allowances at least rises. But I think Washington State is the other one that had been interested for a while in joining California's program, and they unfortunately did not pass the legislation there, but I think that there had been some interest in soil carbon projects as part of that initiative, but it's a little speculative right now, unfortunately, because it didn't end up passing.
Yeah, it's such a shame that we haven't, in my opinion, it's such a shame that we haven't advanced more in this area, because given how vital soil carbon is, for example, for keeping soils healthy and bacterial activity and all that stuff in the soil, given how important food is, we all like to eat, and given that carbon is being emitted through poor agricultural practices all over the world, it seems such a shame that we haven't really tackled this in a more comprehensive and effective way. I do hope, I wish your initiative and the work, the research and everything that you're doing is, and pushing the markets will wake people up a little bit about this opportunity and really necessity to protect our source of food in the future, for example. But also, of course, all of the nature that can coexist and thrive in regenerative or organic, farms. So I think that that's pretty much it on the questions, and I just want to thank you both for your hard work and your commitment to this issue and trying to move the needle for the farmers and So maybe just some final thoughts from you guys to end the webinar. Sam, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we're excited to be able to get all of your feedback here today and to think about different contexts where these kinds of ideas can work, and just to encourage any of you that want to continue the conversation. Would love to connect on LinkedIn or whatever other social media, Twitter that's out there. We'd love to continue to hear about these opportunities, because we really do see this, even though our focus right now has been a US-based program. We see this as an international opportunity with certainly regional differences and shades of gray and interesting, important complexities. But we see this as a scalable climate solution that can create rural prosperity and climate justice internationally. So we're excited to be part of that conversation. Claire,
Excellent.
additional thoughts?
I mean, I think you've said it. Soil, Manuel just said soil is everywhere. So I think, we really enjoy problem solving this for the impact it can have. So, we're trying to make carbon yield a success, but we also just love the work and love working with partners like everyone who's asked great questions. So thank you all for, bringing yourselves to this conversation.
Great. And just one last question. You've got the launch of Hudson Carbon coming, or the marketplace, right? So how can people find out more information on that launch and about carbon yield? Is it maybe Claire, you can just type in the website or something, yeah, and or just announce it now here.
Well, the website is hudsoncarbon.com. That'll be where the marketplace is located, but we'll also, like Sam said, make an announcement on LinkedIn and send it around. So if you want to get the announcement, just drop your email into the chat, please.
Yeah, and I think on the Hudson Carbon page, you can also sign up for a newsletter, which will have a little detail about the research that's underway and marketplace launch. And we have a much more low-tech contact form on our carbon yield website, carbon-yield.com, but welcome to connect with us there as well.
Great. Okay, and on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining, and thank Kumar at the Secretariat for organizing this, and thank you to Claire and Sam. Really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
So much.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.